Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Always exciting.
This one's a doozy.
Right.
We are going all the way to India for this one and taking a look at a marriage that, well, it didn't even last a day.
A one-day marriage. Okay, tell me more.
That's right.
I'm intrigued.
We're looking at the Supreme Court of India's judgment in the case of K. Srinivas Rao v. D.A. Deepa from 2013.
Supreme Court case. Wow.
It is a wild case, and we are going to do our best to break it down for you.
Well, if it ended up in the Supreme Court, I'm guessing it's a bit more complicated than just calling off the wedding.
That's right. So K. Srinivas Rao and D.A. Deepa had a traditional Hindu wedding, it looks like, back in 1999.
Okay.
But the day after the ceremony, a huge fight broke out between their families.
Oh, no. Like in-laws kind of thing.
Yeah, so bad, in fact, that the police got involved.
Oh, wow. That's serious.
That's right.
So, I mean, family drama is one thing, but how does a fight, even a bad one, land in the Supreme Court? What happened?
So right after this all happened, Deepa left with her family and filed a police complaint against Rao and his family alleging dowry harassment.
Dowry harassment.
Yeah.
That's serious.
And there's more.
Oh, boy.
She even accused Rao's mother of something pretty shocking.
Okay.
Urging Deepa to sleep with Rao's father.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a pretty intense accusation. Was she maybe trying to use that to force him to take her back?
It doesn't seem like it.
Go ahead.
Rao denied everything, and the police ultimately ended up dropping the case.
Okay.
But you can imagine that type of accusation would do some serious damage.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. And that is really where the legal battle kicks off. Because despite all of this, Deepa filed for restitution of conjugal rights, which basically asks the court to force Rao to take her back and honor the marriage.
Oh, I mean, that takes guts, considering what had already happened. So I'm guessing Rao wasn't exactly thrilled about this.
Not at all. He countered by filing for divorce, citing cruelty and desertion.
So wait a minute. They were barely even married, right? How can you claim cruelty if they barely even live together as husband and wife?
That's a really great question, and it gets to the heart of this case.
Okay.
The judgment goes deep into this concept of mental cruelty under Hindu marriage law.
Okay.
Which doesn't actually require physical abuse or even cohabitation.
I see. So it's about the impact of someone's actions rather than just physical acts.
Exactly. And the court really dives into that, looking at, previous cases and, what constitutes that mental cruelty.
So even though they weren't living together, things that happened outside the marriage, like this police complaint, could still be grounds for divorce.
Yeah, potentially.
Wow.
And to bolster that argument, the court looked at things like, making false accusations and legal proceedings, filing complaints that have no basis, even attempting to damage someone's career.
Interesting. So even without physical violence, these kinds of actions can be seen as a form of mental cruelty, enough to potentially end a marriage. Okay, so did the court ultimately rule in Rao's favor?
They did. They granted him the divorce.
Wow.
While they did acknowledge that both parties probably played a part in the breakdown, ultimately, they found that Deepa's actions, particularly that initial police complaint, really caused Rao significant mental anguish.
It does make you wonder, though. I mean, do these types of rulings potentially make it easier for men in India to divorce their wives? It feels a little unbalanced, That is a really, really good question, and it is something that we should all be considering and thinking about. Yeah.
This judgment does raise a lot of important questions about possible biases in the legal system, particularly when it comes to mental cruelty.
Especially in a case like this where Rao worked as an assistant registrar in the Andhra Pradesh High Court.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that could have subconsciously or even consciously influenced the outcome?
I mean, it's certainly possible, right? This whole case really just brings to light a lot of the complexities of Indian divorce law when you're dealing with issues like mental cruelty.
Yeah, it's not always black and white, right?
It's not black and white. The court really has to weigh a lot of factors, including how severe the actions were, and then also the financial situations of both parties.
Right, because even if a marriage is falling apart, you still have to think about the practical consequences for both people involved.
Exactly. And speaking of the financial situation, the court didn't let Rao totally off the hook.
Oh, okay. What do you mean?
They ordered him to pay Deepa a significant amount of alimony.
How much are we talking?
1,500,000 rupees.
Wow, that's quite a bit of money. I'm guessing that was to help her get back on her feet.
That's right. They recognized that she was financially dependent on her family and that with this divorce, she was going to be in a tough spot.
Okay, so even in cases of proven mental cruelty, the courts are still thinking about the financial well-being of both parties, especially if there's a power imbalance.
That's right. It's not just about assigning blame here, but about making sure the outcome is fair.
That makes sense.
But what I found really interesting in all of this was the Supreme Court's focus on mediation.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that.
So they actually tried to mediate between Rao and Deepa before things escalated, hoping to maybe salvage the marriage.
So they weren't just focused on the legal battle. They actually took a more proactive approach, trying to find a resolution outside the courtroom.
Exactly. And the judgment really stresses how important these types of things are, mediation, pre-litigation counseling, especially when you're dealing with these types of disputes.
Yeah, I mean, mediation can be so helpful in situations like this. It gives couples a safe space to actually talk to each other, understand each other's perspectives, and maybe even work things out without a big legal fight.
Right. And it allows for a more nuanced approach, considering everybody's emotional well-being.
And it can be particularly effective in cases where the root of the problem is miscommunication or cultural differences, things like that.
Yeah, sometimes the best solution isn't battling it out in court.
That's so true.
Sometimes it's just, sitting down and talking it through and seeing if there's a way to move forward together.
Of course, in a case like this, where dowry harassment is a criminal offense in India, things get a bit more complicated. You can't just settle a criminal case outside of court.
Absolutely. And the Supreme Court acknowledged this complexity, but they made a pretty interesting suggestion.
Okay, I'm listening.
They urged the courts to think about using mediation even in dowry cases, as long as it doesn't impact, the legal process.
So they're essentially saying, let's try to find a balance between upholding the law and promoting peaceful resolutions.
Yeah, let's not just jump to punishment right away.
Right.
Let's see if we can address, the root of the problem and find a solution that really works for everybody involved.
It's a pretty progressive stance, especially with the sensitivity around dowry-related cases. It sounds like they're trying to balance justice with compassion.
That's a great way to put it.
They're not letting anyone off the hook, but they're also recognizing that there might be a better way to handle these situations.
And it really reflects, I think, a growing understanding that justice isn't always just about punishment.
Totally.
Sometimes it's about reconciling and healing.
Of course, this doesn't mean giving a free pass to anyone who's actually committed dowry harassment.
No, of course not.
The court was very clear about that, but it's about finding solutions that are both fair and compassionate.
Right. And I think this whole case really makes you think about the what ifs.
For sure.
Could things have been different for Rao and Deepa if they had tried mediation sooner?
It's hard to say for sure, but maybe with the right support and guidance, they could have found a better way to address their issues, whether that meant reconciling or just moving on in a healthier way. This case really highlights how important early intervention can be.
It really does. And it reminds us that even in these cases that reach the highest court, there are real people at the center of it who are going through real pain.
Awesome.
And often there are missed opportunities to resolve things in a more amicable way.
This isn't just about analyzing a legal case. It's about understanding the human story behind it.
That's right.
And how those stories really shape how we view the law.
And seeing the law not just as a set of rules,
right,
but as a way to help us navigate the messiness of human relationships.
Exactly.
Especially ones that are as complicated and as emotionally charged as marriage.
Even though this was a short and tumultuous marriage, it gives us a glimpse into how divorce law is evolving in India.
Yeah.
And the increasing role of mediation in resolving conflict peacefully. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone involved, not just winning a legal battle.
It really is a powerful reminder that sometimes the best outcome isn't about winning or losing.
Totally.
It's about addressing those core issues and finding a way to move forward with fairness and ideally a sense of resolution for everyone involved.
Well said.
And sometimes I think the most meaningful outcomes aren't about punishment, but about helping people move on in a way that allows them to heal and to rebuild their lives.
This case, with all its drama and twists and turns, really highlights how complicated marriage and divorce can be in today's world, especially in a place like India with such strong traditions.
It definitely makes you think, even in a place with such deep-rooted traditions, the legal system is changing to try to keep up with how relationships are changing and to deal with the emotional toll that these conflicts can take.
Absolutely. And it really underscores how important it is to seek help and support early on, whether that's through counseling, mediation, or other forms of intervention. Sometimes the best way to deal with these tough situations isn't by fighting it out in court, but by finding ways to communicate, understand, and maybe even forgive.
Because at the end of the day, it's important to remember that there's a human story at the heart of it all.
A story that deserves to be heard, understood, and hopefully resolved in a way that promotes healing and allows everyone involved to move forward with dignity and hope. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the case of K. Srinivas Rao v. Deepa, what would you say is the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Marriage is a complex journey, and sometimes things just don't work out the way we planned. But when conflicts arise, it's so important to approach them with empathy, understanding, and a genuine willingness to explore solutions that prioritize everyone's well-being.
Beautifully said. Because in the end, it's not about winning a legal battle, but about finding a path towards peace, resolution, and the possibility of a brighter future.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave our listeners with this thought. In a world that often seems to reward winning at all costs, what would it look like to prioritize understanding, empathy, and compassion, even when we're facing conflict?
That's a powerful question, one that's definitely worth pondering.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep seeking those aha moments that make life so fascinating. And speaking of the financial situation, the court didn't totally let Rao off the hook.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they ordered him to pay Deepa alimony.
Okay, so they saw that even though her actions were a big part of the problem, she was still going to be in a difficult position financially because of the divorce.
Right.
That's pretty significant, especially considering they sided with Rao about the mental cruelty.
It really is a lot of money, too.
How much did they say he had to pay?
1,500,000 rupees.
Wow.
Yeah, so a lot.
Okay, so it seems like they were really trying to strike a balance here, acknowledging the harm done, but also looking out for Deepa's well-being.
Exactly. And trying to ensure a fair outcome for everybody.
That makes sense.
But what I thought was really interesting was that the Supreme Court highlighted the role of mediation in this whole thing.
Really? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so it looks like they actually tried to get Rao and Deepa to mediate.
Oh, wow.
Before things went this far.
To try and salvage the marriage, maybe?
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty proactive of them, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, they weren't just focused on the legal stuff. They were really thinking about the bigger picture.
I like that, trying to find a solution outside the courtroom.
Yeah, and the judgment actually emphasizes the importance of mediation and pre-litigation counseling.
It's so true. I mean, mediation can be so valuable in these kinds of situations. It gives people a chance to communicate, really understand each other's perspectives,
right,
and maybe even find a way to work things out without a drawn-out legal battle.
It allows for more nuance.
Exactly.
And considers everybody's emotional well-being.
It's not always about winning or losing, right? Sometimes it's about finding a solution that works for everyone.
Exactly. And sometimes the best solution isn't, fighting it out in court.
Definitely.
Just sitting down, talking, seeing if there's any way to move forward together.
Now, of course, in this particular case, dowry harassment is a criminal offense in India. So things get a little more complicated.
Yeah.
You can't exactly just settle a criminal case outside of court.
Right. But the Supreme Court recognized that and actually made a really interesting suggestion.
What was that?
They encouraged courts to consider using mediation.
Even in dowry harassment cases.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't compromise the legal process.
So trying to find that balance between upholding the law and promoting some kind of, amicable resolution.
Right, not jumping straight to punishment.
I see. So trying to address those underlying issues and finding a solution that truly works for everyone involved.
Exactly.
It's a pretty progressive stance, especially considering the sensitivity around dowry cases.
Yeah, and I think it reflects a growing understanding that justice isn't just about punishing people.
For sure.
Sometimes it's about reconciliation, about helping people heal.
Absolutely.
It's about acknowledging the harm that's been done, but also trying to move forward in a constructive way.
Of course, this doesn't mean letting people who are guilty of dowry harassment just off the hook.
Right, of course not.
The court was very clear about that. It's more about trying to find solutions that are just, but also compassionate.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, so they're not condoning any wrongdoing, but they're also recognizing that there might be a better way to approach these situations.
It really makes you wonder about the what-ifs.
Absolutely.
Could things have turned out differently for Rao and Deepa if they had gone to mediation sooner?
Yeah, it's impossible to know for sure.
Right.
But maybe if they'd had the right support and guidance, they could have figured out a better way to handle their problems, whether that meant staying together or just figuring out how to move on in a healthier way.
Right.
This case really shows how important it is to address these issues early on.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that even in these cases that make it all the way to the highest court, there are real people at the heart of it. People who are hurting. And there were probably missed opportunities to resolve things in a more peaceful way.
It's not just about analyzing a legal case.
Right.
It's about understanding the human story behind it all.
And how those stories can change how we view the law.
Exactly.
It's about seeing the law not just as a set of rigid rules, but as a framework to help us navigate these complicated human relationships.
Absolutely, especially ones as intense and emotionally charged as marriage.
Exactly.
Even though this was a short and difficult marriage. It gives us a window into how divorce law is evolving in India and the growing importance of mediation as a way to resolve conflict peacefully.
Yeah, it really is a powerful reminder that it's not always about winning or losing in the eyes of the law.
Totally.
It's really about finding solutions that address, the root causes and promote some fairness and hopefully some resolution for everybody involved.
I think you said that perfectly.
And sometimes the best outcomes aren't about punishment, but about helping people heal and rebuild their lives,
100%.
In this case, I think really just highlights just how complicated marriage and divorce can be, especially in a place like India with all these, deeply rooted traditions.
Yeah, and even with those traditions, it's really interesting to see how the legal system is changing to keep up with, the evolving dynamics of relationships and trying to address the emotional toll that these conflicts can take.
Yeah, it makes you think.
It really does.
It underscores how important it is to look for help and support early on.
Absolutely.
Whether that's counseling, mediation, whatever it is.
Yeah, sometimes it's so much better to try and work things out outside of a courtroom, to communicate, understand each other's perspective, maybe even find a way to forgive.
Because at the end of the day, it's a human story.
It is.
And their human stories deserve to be heard and understood.
Definitely.
So as we wrap up our deep dives into this case of K. Srinivas Rao and D.A. Deepa, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that marriage is a complex thing.
It is.
And sometimes it just doesn't work out the way we hope it will. But when those conflicts do happen, it's crucial to approach them with empathy, with understanding, and a willingness to find solutions that work for everyone.
Yeah, because in the end, it shouldn't be about, winning at all costs.
Right.
It's about finding a path towards peace and resolution and a brighter future for everybody.
Beautifully said.
And on that note, we'll leave our listeners with a thought to ponder.
Okay, I like it.
In a world that often glorifies winning at all costs, what would it look like to prioritize understanding, empathy, compassion, even in the midst of really serious conflict?
That's a powerful question and one that's really worth thinking about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure. Always fascinating to delve into these cases with you.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep seeking those aha moments that make life so interesting.